for the 2 or 3 people in the room that I don't know my first name, I'm John Parrott. I'm the airport manager at the Anchorage International Airport. That does include Lake Hood. We've got several airport and Dallas staff here tonight, and that'll probably become apparent as we go through tonight. But I want to thank you all for taking the time to come and meet tonight and take a look at some of the potential development plans around the Lake Hood Seaplane Base and provide us with your input and ask questions. I will apologize in advance. I have another event I have to go to that has to do with the Great Alaska Aviation Gathering, which is this weekend. So if you're an airplane person, that's happening in the FedEx hangar this weekend, and we welcome everybody to come out to that. But without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Tom, and he'll tell you what we've got so far. Once again, thanks for coming.
Thanks, John. I'm actually mic'd up here, so we can shout and overshout each other. Speaking of technology, I'll just mention we're having this meeting live streamed, and if anybody is listening in, you do have an opportunity to make comments on our website and type them in, and we'll be doing them later on, your comments and questions when we get to that part of the meeting. So please feel free to do that if you're listening in. As John said, thanks for coming to the meeting. It's great for those of you that have stuck through this 18 months or so that we've been working on the airport master plan. This is our final public meeting for the master plan, where we're presenting the recommended plan and the proposed capital improvement program. And some of you might remember our last meeting in November, we presented the alternatives. So today we're wanting to get back with you and explain what came out of those alternatives and what we're actually recommending. Would the airport staff just raise your hand just so folks know who you are? And would the Dell staff just raise your hands? So we've got a few Dell people in here as well, and it looks like we've outnumbered you again. But thanks for coming tonight. So just to start out, why don't we take a quick look at the meeting agenda, and I know I'm already feeling like I'm a little bit too formal for a small group, but here's our agenda. We've been visiting with some of you informally for the last half hour. Now we're into the presentation, which hopefully won't go 45 minutes. But we'll talk about some things we discussed prior, what is a master plan and why we do them. We'll briefly talk about what the alternatives were and how they were evaluated. And then really the meat of the meeting is to get into the development plan, which includes both capital projects and other kinds of projects. And then how we pay for those projects, and then how those payments are phased over time, over 20 years. And then we'll wrap up with next steps. And then we'd like to take your public comments and questions at that time. If you would just hold your questions and comments until we get to that period, and hopefully it'll be before 45 minutes from now. But we want to make sure we can give you plenty of time for that. So what is a master plan? Again, this is something we've talked about before, but it's a long-term development plan for the airport. In a master plan, it's typically, we plan out 20 years. Beyond 20 years, it's a little bit harder to predict what might happen in the future. So we break it into short, medium, and long-term development phases. But one distinction, it is a development plan, but it is not a plan that resolves all the airport's management, operations, or maintenance issues that have come up during the master plan. We've gotten comments on different things that maybe pertain to those, to maintenance or management of tie downs and slips and those kinds of things. We have documented those things, but we're not resolving them in the master plan, because that's not what a master plan does. In the end, the products are a 20-year development plan, which we're going to go through tonight, which includes a capital improvement program, airport layout plan, which is a technical drawing showing how the plan meets all the FAA design standards, and then it's all documented in a final master plan report. Various reasons for doing a master plan. It's just important to understand what your priorities are and when they should occur, and that the airport is developed in a safe manner. If you figure out where things should go and you've sited them properly, then you don't have to relocate them in the future. And all of that is really a fiscally responsible way to do business. It's all recommended by the FAA, particularly if you're going to use their funding to do the improvements. And it not only guides airport improvements and the capital improvements the airport builds, but it does guide leasing decisions and private development on the airport as well. And then probably the most important reason is that Lakewood is an important economic engine for the community. I jotted down here what the numbers are. According to the Economic Impact Study, Lakewood was responsible for over 300 jobs during the peak time of the year and over 42 million in total economic activity in a given year. So it's an important economic engine. It's just important to the aviation lifestyle of the state and the residents of Anchorage, for visitors who use Lakewood and tourists, and for many of us who fly out to fishing spots and all those kinds of things. So it's really important to our lifestyle as well. So where have we been and where we're headed? Maybe it's hard to see some of it with the coloring here, but we broke our schedule starting in mid-2014 into investigating what the problems are and what we have today and doing forecasts. Then we moved in the middle of 2015 into what are some of the solutions. How do we solve some of the issues and problems that were brought up? And now we're into the implementation phase where we're looking at a capital improvement program and how it's funded, and we've come up with a recommended alternative that we're going to go through tonight. Probably important for you to know in terms of where we're headed. By September of this year, we should have a draft report that will be out for public review, and we'll wrap up the project towards the end of the year. So that's kind of the general background. Maybe now jumping a little bit more into the specifics of the alternatives and the recommended draft development plan. These were the four alternatives. They were basically groupings of projects into do very little, just no capital improvements, pretty much maintain minor maintenance of what you have. A little more expensive, a little more higher level of activity of investment to do major maintenance projects and to address FAA design standards that are mainly safety related. And then moving up to kind of the level of investment to improve some existing facilities, and then some of the more expensive were to expand facilities. So it was a way to group projects that is how we presented it in our alternatives at our last meeting in November. Important to note as we look at the recommended alternative or the draft development plan that we have projects from all of these categories that are in our recommended development plan. And so you'll see that we've done it that way. So I'm not going to go through all those projects with you. I'm just going to talk about the recommended ones, but I want you to know that as we evaluated the projects, we did that through our advisory committee, which met in September and March and talked about the projects. We had an open house with some of you present in November. We did a user survey in December where we got ratings of different projects. We met with the FAA and got a handle on and a feeling for what their priorities were. Again, mostly safety driven, and as well as the staff getting a better handle on where the maintenance priorities are in particular. And then we met with the Lakewood User Group, the Lakewood Pilots Association, and like a couple other groups that we met with, all part of our project evaluation. So in those four alternatives, we had 40 total projects among all those alternatives, and our draft development plan includes 27 out of the 40. And in a few cases, we did not recommend it, whatever, I guess that's 13 that were not recommended. Some of them were addressed by other projects. One example would be we had shown some options to expand slips in Lakewood. Well, we didn't do that because we expanded slips elsewhere in one of the recommended projects that you'll see. Some of the projects were just not very cost effective, and some were, the need was it was an idea, but maybe not necessarily a strong need to build a boathouse in Lake Spenard or to do a compass rose on the airport airports. There were some of them were fairly small, but the need was unclear, but can certainly be revisited later. So these are 13 of the 27 projects. And these are what we're calling the recommended capital improvement program projects, as opposed to another list you're going to see in a minute that are not capital improvements. Capital improvements are typically larger projects that at Lake Hood are funded primarily by the FAA. Typically, a design consultant is hired or design engineer to design them, and then you put out bids, and a contractor is hired to construct them. Some of the other projects you'll see in a minute that are not CIP projects are things that could be done by airport staff without hiring an engineer and without hiring a contractor. They tend to be mostly smaller things. So these are capital improvement program projects. And these are all the costs, and you can't see all this, but they're on the boards, and we're going to go through each of the individual projects here next. So this is the graphic that goes with the recommended plan. And again, I'm going to go through each of the projects that were on the list that you just saw. The first one is project number 1 is to resurface a piece of pavement on Lakeshore Taxiway that is seeing some current problems. The design is actually already underway. The airport is committed to doing this. They're in discussions with the FAA to get it funded. There's also the ramp on the west side of the lake to pull our floatplanes out of the water. That also needs to be resurfaced, reconstructed as well. And then there's another piece of the Lakeshore Taxiway up here that needs some attention. So those are the two main areas that are part of that project number 1. That project is estimated to cost $4 million. So it costs a lot of money to do these projects. Second project, even more expensive, at about $8 million, over $8 million, is the Taxiway Victor that connects Lake Hood with Anchorage International. That has some significant surface issues as well as subsurface issues. So what I'm hearing is they're likely going to have to dig out some of the structural fill because of the problems that they're having with settlement and the effect of that on pavement. It actually could be that it's going to extend further towards international as well. But that's the important connector that connects Lake Hood and Anchorage International, allows traffic to go back and forth. Because some aircraft that are at Lake Hood cannot either need to be on instrument, operate in instrument landing conditions, which requires them to land at Anchorage International and then taxi over. Some of them need longer runways or they need to be on pavement, which is not available at Lake Hood. So that's part of the reason they're going back and forth. The third project is not specifically shown on here. It's kind of an airport-wide project, and it's very generally, not very specifically scoped out yet, but it's safety and security improvements. Many of the people who completed surveys said that we would like to reduce vandalism, we'd like to have better visibility out there, maybe we need some overhead lighting in some spots, maybe some areas need to be fenced off. So it's kind of maybe there's some areas that need to have flashing lights to warn pedestrians that they're entering onto an airport. So there's kind of a variety of ideas, kind of a laundry list of ideas that have come up either by users or by the FAA to improve safety and security on the airports. And we kind of put in a placeholder of about $2 million in funding to do that at various places on the airport. The fourth project is erosion control, and there's been a couple different places on the airport, just right off the map here. There's been some erosion control that's been done by the airport in the past. And so this is a continuation of what has appeared to be pretty popular among the users to get the shoreline banks that are eroding, to get those cleaned up and stabilized, to dredge out the area right in front of the slip that is filling in over time. So these are some of the priority areas in Lake Spenard that we would propose based on current conditions. And here's some areas in Lake Hood that have some of the higher levels of erosion. The fifth project is, back to this, repairing the floatplane ramp. So we talked about the full plane ramp over on the west side. This is the one on the north side. They both have some problems with surface condition, and amphibious aircraft have trouble getting in and out of there because they're not long enough and they're maybe a little too shallow. The water's too shallow right there. So we're not exactly sure that if it's going to be totally replaced or if it can be fixed. And there could well be some other amenities around the ramp that gets included in the project as well. The sixth project is a continuation of property acquisition. Here's the airport's property boundary, and there's some land that still remains in private hands around the airport. The airport isn't going to condemn anybody, but if there's a property owner that's ready to sell their property, the airport has an open offer to be the first person to make an offer on the project, on the property, so the airport can control all the property on its boundary. The seventh project is a parallel taxiway and road. So this is in yellow or golden is the taxiway, and this other color is the road. And right now there's just a road, but there's somewhere around 20 aircraft a day that taxi up and down that road to go over to Hood Strip. And mixed in with the airplane traffic is customers of the businesses who are driving up and down there. Some of them understand they're on an airport and there may be taxiing aircraft, some of them don't, aren't accustomed to airplane activity, and so it's an effort to improve the safety of operations through here by segregating taxiing aircraft surface from road surface. And that project is a priority of the FAA as well, because of the safety implications. And that is estimated at $1.1 million. These are some of the slips that were fixed up a few years back during that erosion control and dredging that I mentioned a bit ago. When they were fixed up, they shifted the slip kind of out in this direction just to make a little more room for this future road and taxiway. So that's been kind of factored into that design. The eighth project involves the gravel strip, which over 20 years, and again, this is a 20-year plan, all this isn't going to happen overnight, it's 20 years. At some point during the 20-year period, they're going to need to do a major runway resurfacing with gravel, not pavement, but with gravel, and replace the lighting system. So I don't think that's going to be needed for some time, but in a 20-year plan, we want to make sure the runway is in good shape and it remains in good shape. And that's estimated to cost $3.2 million. The ninth project was in the last master plan to add another floatplane ramp on the south side of Lake Hood. That's estimated at about $500,000, and the downside of it is that you would lose a couple slips by putting a ramp in there. But during certain wind conditions, the other two ramps are a little more difficult to maneuver in and out of, so it helps in some wind conditions, and it also provides a third option when all the ramps are busy. The next project is, I guess, probably the most complicated. It's broken into 10A, 10B, and 10C, and we'll start with 10A. So, well, let's actually start with what you have today, which isn't really apparent from this graphic, but today you have Lakeshore Drive, which comes up through here, and you can see we've eliminated Lakeshore Drive in this graphic. It comes through here. And the tie downs, the wind strip tie downs are right here, the gravel tie downs. So what we've done is moved the gravel tie downs over here. We've added a new access road. We've added a partial parallel taxiway. So that's part one of 10A. 10B is then to take Lakeshore Drive, which is over in this area, move it over to the east with a engineered according to standards trail following it, alongside of it. So you have a parallel taxiway, and you have a road, and you have a pedestrian path. And then each of these fingers that have some airplane activity, again in yellow you'll see the one that we talked about earlier that has access to the runway. This finger here would have a taxiway access to the parallel taxiway. This finger would have access either through here or through here. This one would, and this one would as well. So it's a project that separates airplanes, automobiles, and people In doing so, we move tie downs over here, we provide space for additional lease expansion. And the third part of it is in the area where there used to be wheel tie downs, now we've dredged out and created more shoreline for floodplain slips. And we've estimated somewhere in the 20 to 30 range of new floodplain slips. Looks like it would be more on the surface, but some of it involves actually doing away with slips. As you dredge some out, you're going to lose some, but then there'll be a net increase of 20 to 30 slips. There's a couple of leaseholders that are affected, and you'll see some orange there. So if we take part of his lot, there's a potential to add some space for him, maybe to give him some waterfront development. This guy, again, you don't see it on this drawing because it's the after picture, but he has some docks and things out in here that he loses. So we've tried to provide a comparable amount of space for that leaseholder. So that was a longer project, a longer explanation. Project 11, there's a parallel taxiway here today, and when we get down to this area, the taxiway takes a jog towards the tie downs. The FAA doesn't like taxiways that have jogs in them. They're supposed to be straight. Amazing. So this straightens out the taxiway and it resurfaces it. And right now we're estimating about $1.5 million to do that. Taxiway H3, this is a really small project. It's project 12, but it's hard to see in the drawing, but it's an angled taxiway that kind of goes like this. And FAA standard is that they now all be perpendicular, kind of like you see these perpendicular taxiways. So take away the angle, make it perpendicular, and that's a small, very small project, a couple $100,000, hopefully cheaper. The last project involves something that's a priority for the FAA and the airport to try to reduce incursions or basically vehicles or people who wander out into the runway. So putting in some fencing, you see a 13 here by this connector, basically putting in some gates where the connectors are, similar to the gate system perhaps that's already out here where this taxiway enters the airport. So there's a couple of gates there now, so something along those lines. So that's all of the capital projects, and in total, they total up, we'll see the numbers in a minute, but they total up to a little bit over $40 million for the capital projects over 20 years. So let's go to what we're calling the other projects that are not capital projects. And what that means is there's some of these projects that are things the airport can do, not with capital money, but what they call operating money. Basically the money that pays the salaries and pays for sand and for other commodities the airport uses to maintain the airport. Between their own airport staff and their own commodities, they should be able to do some of these things without a large capital project and without hiring an engineer. There tend to be smaller things. Some of these projects are also involve possibly outside money. Some of them are a little bigger and involve money besides money from the airport. And then some of them are management actions that don't cost anything. They're just kind of coordinate with the FAA and take care of this. So we'll go through each of these. First one, and again, it sounds kind of odd, and the reason maintaining existing facilities is on here because it was one of the alternatives in the alternatives analysis. But yeah, the airport's going to maintain existing facilities. They'll do that with operating budget money. The second line is a little bit like that. It's kind of operating the airport, but there are areas where aircraft taxi today on these fingers that are they're pretty narrow, and they're really designed for roads and for cars, but not for airplanes. We looked at whether you could actually do something like what's done over here with a parallel road and taxiway, or even to widen them out and just put a taxiway in there, but there's not space. If you build a taxiway in there, basically you're pushing the aircraft in the slips out into the water, and they wouldn't have any place on land or a place for sheds. So there really was no way to make legal taxiways in here. The best we can suggest in the plan is for the airport to work with the users, and if there's room to shift the shacks a little closer to shore without disrupting their operation or park the aircraft a little bit closer to shore, keeping a little bit wider space so the pilots can taxi aircraft up and down there. The other thing I'll mention is that the airport's operating rules are that this should not be an area where the general public drives. It's really an area for pilots to be driving and not for the general public. There's no businesses down here that the public would need to get to compared to this finger here. So hopefully just through some management actions and cooperative efforts working with the users, we can kind of keep as wide of an area as we can for some limited taxiing that goes on there. Projects C, D, and E are similar in that it's kind of an educational effort to separate aircraft, automobiles, and pedestrians through education, through signage, flashing lights. Some of these things could be done through airport staff efforts or for some limited projects the airport can do with their operating budget. We investigated whether there was a need to deepen the lake in any spots, and we were talking in meetings like this with the users that did not seem to be a problem. We looked at the topo maps of the bottom of the lake, and we could see there are some areas that are starting to seem to be getting a little bit shallower, but I don't think they're enough of a problem to be too concerned about. But over time, if it does become a problem, the airport felt that they could just deal with it by getting their own staff out there and taking care of it with their own staff. Didn't require a big capital project. The next two are some FAA standards. One's called the runway visibility zone. The last master plan recommended that since it's a towered airport, that the runway visibility zone is really something that you could get an exemption or a modification of standards for. So without going into a lot of detail, it's just sort of a technical request through the FAA to not have to be concerned about that because the tower already manages any potential problem of visibility. They're up there at the heights of the tower and they're able to see where the aircraft are on the water when they're taking off and landing. This one, F, is another management action. There is I think maybe I have that on here. There's a couple of these slots here and here that are in a runway protection zone, which is kind of an area off the end of the water lane where ideally you do not have development that encourages the congregation of people, so that if an airplane did go down, you don't want a lot of people there that would be harmed. There's a corner of some of these buildings that are actually in the runway protection zone, not the entire building, but just a corner. So this management action is just for the airport to keep an eye on it, and if that tenant ever needed to develop or expand, to not make the problem any worse than it is by approving a major development that would put more of the building within the runway protection zone. But what's there today can stay, just don't make the problem any worse. Project G is the Spenard Beach. There were discussions and some of the alternatives that looked at adding slips into Lake Spenard, and as I said, that was not recommended, but what was recommended was to do more to make the airport a good neighbor, to educate those who come here, not to fly, but to see flying, and just to put in more informational materials about the airport so people get a better sense of what they're seeing, maybe history, maybe there's airplane displays that would go either here or both. And there are existing places that people already do go, but maybe to do more, maybe to work with the museum, work with the municipal parks, and come up with some different things that might make Lakewood a place that people want to come and visit, even if they're not flying. Project H was a small project. There's an engine run-up area right here, some concrete, and some of the pilots asked if we could double the width so you could have passing aircraft coming off the runway and aircraft going onto the runway right where that engine run-up area is. So the airport felt that's pretty small, we can do that ourselves. And Project I is just, there were some requests to improve the services for the float planes that are transient, just they're not based at the airport, but they're just coming in to visit, and they're parked there temporarily, maybe some fencing or overhead lighting or electrical plug-ins. So airport felt that if those things are needed, they could do that without a capital project. I'm almost finished. They Okay. The next project is one that's somewhat controversial, proposed pathway along the east side of Hood Strip and coming along Aircraft Drive and connecting to the existing path that's here. You might remember when I talked about the road and taxiway separation here, that there would be a pathway here. So this is in addition to the path that we're showing here, to have another path around Hood Strip, potentially also connecting up to the coastal trail. A lot of people seem to want to come around and make the loop around Lake Hood, and some want to be in the mix of things. Some of them don't mind being sort of more in the wilderness experience, so to speak. So this would be another alternative. In talking about it with the airport and with the FAA, it did not seem like it would be fundable, given what we think the funding is that would come to the airport, but they felt like there may be opportunities at some point for outside funding to come in, the municipality or who knows where, to do this. So they wanted to keep it in the plan. I'll also note that it's been opposed by the Trinity Community Council in the past and in the recent past as well. I think two last things. One is as I think I mentioned earlier, some potential lease expansion here and over here next to the new tie downs. And then lastly, there was some discussion about that we need to get rid of the porta potties and put in some more substantial toilets. So the airport felt like it was an idea they'd be willing to consider. They didn't need to do a capital project, but they could have plumbed toilets on the airport over time using their operating budget. So those are the capital projects, those are the non-capital projects, the things that would be done out of operating budget. Now we're going to talk for a minute about funding. And a lot of numbers here and a lot of words, but essentially it's a 20-year plan before we figured out how things would be funded and when you would do them. We kind of got to figure out how much money we're going to have to spend. Currently, Lake Hood gets about $1 million a year in what they call FAA passenger entitlements. And entitlement sort of means like what it says. The airport is entitled to get $1 million a year based on the recent past. So that's pretty guaranteed that they would get about $1 million a year unless the rules change, the FAA rules change. The second category is what they call FAA discretionary funding. That's money that's at the discretion of the FAA. It's not entitlement. The FAA has a choice. The airport competes with other airports for that money. And so we just looked at what historically the airport in the last 10, 15 years has gotten in discretionary. They've gotten about $600,000. We bumped it up a couple $100,000 for potential unknown, but potential funding increases, just that Congress could start to add more money to the funding program. So we came up with kind of a ballpark of $875,000 in discretionary and potential congressional increases. And then the airport, to get FAA money, the airport has to throw in 4 to 5% of their own money of the project costs. And so for $2 million, that represents $125,000. And the average annual capital project monies are expected to be about $2 million. Times 20 years is $40 million. You'll see in a minute that what we're proposing costs more than $40 million. So some of the projects we're saying would likely have to be developed beyond 20 years. And this is the CIP phasing plan. I know a lot of small print, and you're not going to see that. It was on one of the boards. Hopefully some of you are able to see that, and all these graphics will be on the website as well if you want to delve into the details. But essentially, there's some early projects in the first 5 years. Here's the second 5 years, and then here's the last 20 years. So some of the early projects are resurfacing and reconstructing that piece of Lakeshore Taxiway that's got problems today, and Taxiway Victor, which has current surfacing problems. The fencing, cameras, and lighting would be an early project. The erosion control would be an early project. The floatplane ramp replacement, an early project. Continuing the land acquisition would be an early project if there was somebody that was ready to sell. If nobody's ready to sell, then we wouldn't do it early. And then the road and taxiway and the commercial finger. Those are all projects that we're proposing to start in the first 5 years. Some of those projects are so expensive that we are also showing some of the money being phased into the second 5 years as well. So that's why you see money for some of these bigger projects like Victor Taxiway, the erosion control, the land acquisition, spreading out over several funding periods because it's just expensive and it's more than we can do with the money we think we're going to get. So those are the near-term projects, the things that kind of get pushed out into the last 10 years. Like I said, the runway resurfacing probably is not needed for some time, and the lighting replacement because it's in reasonably good shape. The airport goes out and does minor resurfacing themselves for their own staff. The South Lake Hood full plane ramp can be pushed out later because it's kind of an expansion thing versus maintaining what you have. And that project 10A, B, and C, where we add this tie downs on the east side of Hood Strip, we do the taxiway and road separation on Lakeshore Taxiway, and we build more slips. That's very expensive, over $10 million, actually close to $15 million. And so we're showing that happening in the last 10 years, and some of it even going beyond the 20-year planning horizon, because it's just more than we think we're going to get in money. Straightening out the parallel taxiway and realigning the taxiway H3 got pushed out as well. Honestly, when we sat down with the airport and we started to kind of figure out the prioritization, and it seemed like everything, we wanted everything in the first 5 years, but it was just not something that we could do. So it was kind of a painful process to kind of figure out what we're going to have to put off because of funding limitations. And then lastly, the fencing and gates would have to be put off. And some of the projects get put off not only because of money, but if we're going to say straighten taxiway, the parallel taxiway, when we straighten it, we're going to cause some tie downs to be relocated because they're going to be affected by the straightened taxiway. So we've got to build the new tie downs before we can straighten the taxiway. So some of the sequencing of one project to the other caused these things to slip out to later years. Again, you can't see this from a distance probably, but first off, all of this stuff costs $47 million in total. Of that $47 million, about $44 million would be paid for by the FAA and about $3 million by the airport. So the airport gets a good deal when they get these FAA grants. They only have to pay in the range of 6% or so for the airport share of the project. So where are we headed from here? We're presented this tonight. We've sent out an email notice. Maybe you got it. Information's on the website. We're asking for comments by May 27th so that during the summer we can work on a draft report and kind of document everything and come up with a final development plan. We will have an advisory committee meeting May. I guess we didn't put the date. That's May 25th or 28th. There'll be a notice on that, but it's in the 20s. I can't remember the date exactly, but we have set the date. Terry, do you remember? And then, as I said, we'll have a draft report out in September. We're planning to have it out for public review in 60 days. And then we will final it later in the fall and early winter.
I believe it's the 25th.
25th, okay. Sorry, we forgot to put that in. Just when we made this slide, we didn't have it set. So, I'm done talking for a little while. This is time to get some comments from you all and get your questions. And again, folks that are on the live stream, if you have any questions or comments, we'd be happy to read them and answer them if they're questions. We're going to take questions and comments from those that are here first. And Leah will walk the mic around, and just please raise your hand if you'd like to make a question or comment. There we go. In the front row.
If you wouldn't mind just stating your name.
All right, I'm Brandon Germer. I live on, next to the K over there on the map, but one of the Ks on 43rd. Anyways, one of the questions I had was, is it priority and an expense to remove the new blooms of algae that are taking over the lake? And has that been factored into a capital consideration? Because if it's eradicated, it's eradicated, or does it fall into airport maintenance because you're not sure you could eradicate it, so it wouldn't fall into a project consideration, but more of an operational ongoing consideration?
It is more of an operating consideration. The airport has operated a weed puller machine. I don't know if they use capital money or operating to purchase it, but it was an expense. And their own staff go out there and pull the weeds, so that's operating as well. Then they have to dispose of the weeds, and that's operating. They have, and if you, I believe it's on the website, is it not, about the Alodia program that's going on?
Yes, and right now, I'm Tim, I'm the Lakewood manager. Last summer, regrettably, Alodia was discovered in Lakewood. That was found by Alaska Department of Natural Resources, and they are charged with trying to eradicate Alodia from the state. That's not a Lakewood thing. They were doing a lot of Alodia here in the state period. So DNR has been acting very aggressively, starting last summer, to try to eradicate that. Now, along the way, the measures that they're taking are having an effect on the other weeds that are perhaps a detriment to aviation. So as flyers, we're very concerned. One, we don't want to be involved in spreading Alodia more than anybody else is. We want to preserve our, the wonders that we've got here in Alaska. Also, though, there is an aviation concern, just weeds, period, in a lake. They can interfere with folks' rudders, for example. So we want to keep those under control. So for the time being, the DNR action is taking care of the Alodia, and that's expected to go on for at least another couple of years. That is sort of, in a way, that's helping us with our weed problem, period. But weeds in general, Alodia or not, are something that the airport is very concerned about, and we will be looking at. But that's not really an FAA capital funding type thing at this point. It's us looking at measures, again, measures that are, prudent. I mean, we want to get rid of the weeds, but we certainly don't want to be causing, other damage along the way that we're doing that. So we're trying to do it in a responsible way. As I say, we're working very closely with DNR, that's the lead agency on that. Obviously, the Department of Environmental Conservation is heavily involved in that. In fact, just maybe getting more technical than you want, but DNR, while they're doing it, they have to get permission, they have to get permitting from DEC. So there's a considerable oversight going on in that Alodia management process, and we're trying to take lessons from that maybe will help us in the long-term deal with the weed situation in Lakewood.
That's perfect, thank you.
Thanks, Tim. We'll go for that. Kathy, I believe you have your hand up next.
Thank you. Kathy Gleason, turning in, and Vice President turning in to the council this year. I've actually got a series of questions, but I'll just ask a couple and then maybe we can get back to you. So how much approximately has Lakewood spent on capital improvement projects in the last 20 years, just so you can kind of get a feel comparatively as opposed to what you're proposing for the next 20 in this plan update?
I think it's about 15 years ago, the airport, Lakewood became eligible for those entitlements. Remember the entitlements? Before that, it was sort of more competitive with other airports, and it was sort of hit and miss whether you got AIP funding. Maybe more detail than you want to know, but there's a criteria to get entitlements. You have to have 10,000 enplanements, 10,000 people getting on an airplane, and you have to have scheduled service. And about 15 years ago, they realized they qualified. They had 10,000 and they had scheduled service, so they applied and got recognized for entitlement funding and started to get that $1 million a year. So I can tell you better after in the last 15 years, it's been about $1.6 million or so on average over the last 10, 15 years. So we're projecting here $2 million, maybe aiming a little bit higher, assuming that we get discretionary. And sometimes when you do a master plan, you made a discretionary than they have in the past. We don't know what Congress is gonna do, they could raise the funding amounts, so we wanted to be prepared. If the money shows up, we've got a list of projects they can do. If the money doesn't, if the money goes down, Congress could go that way as well as this way. If it goes down, reduces funding amounts, then just more of those projects will slip further down in the time frame.
Okay. And secondly, as far as Project J, that pedestrian path, yeah, Turning Community Council has been opposed to it for a long time. For those of you who don't know, since the early 1990s, we still can't fathom why the airport is pushing this idea. You admit it's controversial. You admit our council is opposed to it. It's turning in neighbors that would live right next to it. It would necessitate wetland filling in high-value wetlands. And it's not in the West Anchorage District Plan because we specifically got it removed because we don't want it. And so when you say that other funding would be needed, maybe the muni would pay for it. It's not in the West Anchorage District Plan. The municipality would not fund it because they don't support it in a district plan in our neighborhood. So I respectfully ask once and for all that you remove this project. It's not needed, and as I made the case at the last advisory meeting, people like to walk around the lakes. And it's hard to imagine that people would follow that all the way up to Northern Lights, then turn around and walk on the pavement down Lakeshore Drive, then to get back around to the west side. And while it could provide a way to get from, the south part up to Northern Lights, that's Wisconsin's right there, and it's got a dedicated bike path. It's going to have a dedicated bike lane painted this summer. There's just no need to fill high-value wetlands for a trail proposed by the community council. It's not in our district plan. I don't think you're going to get community funding for it, so let's just please leave it right there.
Thank you for your comments, Kathy. Anyone else have any questions, comments?
I'll give a couple. First, just an overall comment, and that is that as I see the projects here and the funding for the projects, they are mostly directed to the expansion of this facility to accommodate wheeled aircraft. There's lots of, like went up before, there's lots of wheeled aircraft tied down space. This community, without expending our precious dollars to expand and use up on this Lake Hood project. The Lake Hood project is a seaplane base, and we need to concentrate our funding on the seaplane base issues. Item 4, where the erosion is occurring, those were slips that were constructed in the 50s. The state has not maintained the structure of those slips. And when we look at other projects here, the projects in yellow, remember those ramps are not being affected by the guy that's trailering his float plane in and out. Those are for the amphibian airplanes. And the amphibian airplanes already have a gravel strip which they can get to. The one question I do have, and I'll have some more, but I'll let some other people talk. I would like to know who on the technical committee, if you can tell me, who on the technical committee represented the municipality of Anchorage? And as I sit in this room tonight, I don't see the anybody from the governor's aviation board here also, which the municipality has a representative on. And I'd like to know what they had to say about this whole thing before you get there. Thank you.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there was somebody representing the muni on the governor's aviation board that was assigned. So it's sort of indirectly representing the muni. There was a municipal parks person. I don't remember the person's name that came to some of the advisory committee meetings, but I don't see them here, as you said. And that, I think those are the two.
Other questions? I think there was one after
Yeah, I'll take it. Bob Oth,
Oh, I'm sorry, I do remember, Thied Tobish was,
He's a plant, he's a city plant.
yeah, maybe it was Thied and a Parks person, I can't even remember now.
Tom Kersey was there one time, and Josh Graham was there one time.
Yeah, I think they ended up having some turnover too, and so it was a number of different people that came.
Point being that the mayor did not appoint anybody to be there. Mayor did not appoint the guy that's on the advisory board,
Right.
and the mayor doesn't know what the advisory board guy is saying. So that's,
Bob Oth, Spenard resident. I was asking about, wanted to ask about the Lake Shore Drive realignment. Guys, did you say that there's going to be, if that is realigned, that there will be a path right next to it?
Yeah, it's really hard to see, but there's green here that starts here and it continues on along. There we go. A little bit easier to see. That green is the
Okay.
pathway. Right now, the pathway is basically the shoulder of the road, and this would be a more segregated pathway that's outside of technically outside the taxiway object-free area of the taxiway. You know, whether the path is here or it's on this side, details to be worked out, but taxiway, road, pathway, yes.
Okay. So this would be and the road too, that would be a formal change in the road and have to go through all of that,
Yes.
all the formalities of the right of way and everything.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and as I said, this leaseholder here, there's going to be right-of-way issues with him, with this development. We just met with him yesterday, in fact, just to make sure he understood what we were proposing. The rest of the impacted properties are the tie-downs. There is a commercial slip, I think it's right here, so it's actually a floodplain slip that's affected, but he doesn't have a long-term lease, he's just on a year-to-year. And obviously, the people that have slips that are along the shore here, they're gonna be affected and likely be relocated, but they may be happy because they get an engineered slip with all the erosion protection built in and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Margaret On from Spenard Community Council, and a nearby resident. I don't know a lot of this, but I do have a question about the funding. My understanding is Anchorage is part of a statewide network of airports. So when the airport is contributing to something like this, which is peculiar to Anchorage, is there, when you're talking about trying to compete against other airports, are there other airports in Alaska that could be competing against this because the airport system is contributing to that?
Yes, yeah, we compete with, just broadly speaking, I think, I don't know if I would quite describe it this way, but they get a kind of a pot of discretionary for Alaska, and the various airports in Alaska kind of compete for that pot for this discretionary. The FAA, just in general terms, I'll say their priority is to deal with runways, taxiways, aircraft movement areas, aircraft parking aprons. In this case, there's that roadway taxiway separation. I think that would be reasonably high on their priority, even though it does involve a road as well, but it's road and taxiway. So things that involve airplanes and aviation safety, they're going to give a priority in use of this discretionary funding.
Thank you. Anyone else before I circle back to the gentleman? If you don't mind just stating your name.
Go back to the screen here where you show the transient floatplane tie-downs next to the Bernard Lake seal. G down there, it's the lower corner.
Oh, down in G, right to the other one.
That.
Yes.
I'm not sure about the I section on the left of the screen, but on the right of the screen, 3 times in the last, say, 3 years, where we've had high winds, and there's been float planes come in, transients, usually a beaver. That is an absolute mess and a disgrace to the airport. It's all swamp, there's nothing really to tie down to except the trees. Branches are overhanging the area. How about if we could try to get about 10 truckloads of gravel in there, get in there the weed whacker, clean out that underbrush, and put some big augers in so planes get tied down. I don't mind going and getting my own tie-down ropes to loan somebody something overnight. That's just being a fellow aviator.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to load passengers and everything else, and they're having to wade through muck on the land because it's so low, how about some gravel in there?
And again, you're talking about the transient
That
spots.
transit area, I'm across the lake from there, so I see this.
Yeah,
And it's, been going over to helping people. I have to put my hip boots on just to get over there to help put their airplane secured, and I'm not even in the water.
yeah. Thank you for that. And since you have the mic there, I know when we've talked, maybe at our first meeting, you talked about some of the tree problems around the lake as well. Part of our project was to do an aeronautical survey, which is basically a technical word for what are the treetops, what are the building tops, what are all the things that might be obstacles for flying airplanes. So we collected a lot of data, none of that's shown on any of this, but part of that airport layout plan, that final plan that we provide the airport, it shows trees that are going to have to be removed. And there were actually some trees already, I think up in here and maybe over here that the airport already worked on this late winter as a result of our data.
I don't know how easy it would be to remove those trees, but they could sure trim down some of those big limbs that are overhanging the water. Most pilots don't like tree limbs rubbing on their wings.
Gotcha.
Thank you for those comments. And do you have any comments or questions? No? Okay. Anyone else that I haven't gotten to? I think that's everyone. Okay, we'll come back up to the front if you still have a comment or question.
I do. Hello. So, just because it's still up there, and I am curious. So regardless of if J happened or not, there would be a pedestrian path to walk around 4.5 miles around the lake, correct?
So right now, Lakeshore Drive, as I said, is over here. There's a shoulder of the road that's been marked and maybe cleaned up a little bit for trails. So there's little blue markers that say this is where the pedestrian. So it exists today, and that would continue if none of this were built. Is that answering your question?
Yeah. So if none of J was built, that there would still be a pedestrian path to walk around the lake. And if J was built, there would still be a pedestrian path to walk around the lake.
And again, yeah, this shows if we were to build this, it would actually be a better path than what you have today.
Perfect. So that clears that up. And then the main purpose for path J then would be, what if we had 9 deaths, actual human beings dying in the last 3.5 years from getting hit by cars on cyclists, or on bikes in Anchorage. So as we become a more modern city and we start thinking about safety in different terms, as a resident right there on the lake, how we had a friend who just got clipped by a car, an architect in town, and the guy was just a hit and run. Because even though you have a paved path on Wisconsin, you still have to cross many side streets as well as Northern Lights before you ever get access to the coastal trail. So as he grows up, and as I'm an avid cyclist, I may not be popular, but I think J is a safer option for the community to access the coastal trail rather than crossing Northern Lights.
Thank you for those comments. Anyone else have any other comments or questions? Okay, Kathy.
Thank you. Just to respond to you, the rationale for that path, this is for safety purposes in terms of bicyclists.
So I think we'd like to not engage back and forth, I believe, Frank Tom.
I just wanted to provide full information. It was concerned to the rationale that the airport has given for that trail is to reduce the amount of non-motorized traffic you get around the lake. So just to clarify, their rationale, certainly that doesn't discount your concerns, but that's not why they are proposing it. As far as the project, whatever the orange is, and then the two project Ks. And, you know, I noticed that you changed the numbering of all the capital improvement projects from the handout that you gave out at the advisory committee meeting. Is there a reason why you did that? I mean, they're completely different.
Yeah, I think we ended up trying to go in the same order as the phasing plan, so that.
Oh, okay, so it's like a priority.
Kind of,
Now it's a
yeah, sequencing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm not sure what Echo is now, but, I mean, excuse me, the, east of the gravel strip is now. That whole area.
Yeah.
Just as a reminder, when the Echo parking lot was built, there was an environmental assessment done. And of course, the airport was looking at where to locate more traffic. And exactly where you're now proposing the lease lots and tie-down areas east of the gravel strip, that was rejected by the environmental assessment because it would be too impactful to the wetlands and the neighborhood. That's why Echo parking lot, one of the main reasons why Echo parking lot got put where it is. And, you know, I hate to be the airport historian for you guys, but those kinds of things should not be forgotten. And of course, that would be a huge impact to the Turnagain neighborhood if you remove all that natural open space and replace it with things that create additional impacts, noise, emissions, aesthetics, everything. And yes, Turnagain Community Council just voted at our April meeting to once again reaffirm our strong opposition, not only to the pedestrian pathway, but to any of the development within the Turnagain Bog wetlands and associated uplands east of the gravel strip, and also the proposed K area, which is also in Turnagain Bog. So that's FYI, and I think perhaps there needs to be a more in-depth analysis when you start drawing lines over wetlands east of the gravel strip. So I don't know if the Corps would allow a permit, wetlands fill permit for that anyway. And I don't know how you could potentially mitigate anything like that. And you can't. You could not mitigate the negative impacts that it would impose on the adjacent Turnagain neighborhood. There's just no way. And I think it's irresponsible for the airport to continue proposing development in that area. So again, I respectfully ask that be removed from the final draft. As far as the next step slide, I just was a little confused on the time frame, because it said you plan to release the draft in the fall, in September, and then there'd be 2 months. So when you say fall, you mean November?
Yeah.
I guess we always
One
think
person's
it's
fall is another person's winter.
Well, I know, and who knows, it
Especially
might
these
still be
days.
fall, but that is,
Yeah,
so you're looking at November.
yeah. That's
Okay.
probably gonna be the end of the year.
And I'll end on a more positive note. Certainly, we didn't talk about it as the council, but I'll certainly speak for myself that I support your efforts to improve Spinard Beach Park. It is within the Turnagain boundaries, but I'm sure Spinard folks would agree with that as well, because I think our councils still look at that jointly as that's our park. And so when you say who you work with on those enhancements, please include Spinard and Turnagain Community Councils on that. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Anyone else?
Tom, the list of projects over here with the monies on it, that's in that middle section there. Do those monies, those figures, do they include doing environmental assessments and impacts, if needed, on how those projects are going to affect us? And I was talking about specifically to noise in the neighborhood, increased noise and property values, whether they're going to reduce, will there be a reduction in property value? And I'm not, are those just hard numbers to do the project, but do they include the staff work that has to precede them? And that's what I want to know, is where there's got to be more money here to do the environmental stuff. Because as far as I know at this point, all these other improvements to the Lakewood Strip, the extension of it by 2,000 feet, and all the things out there, there's never been an environmental assessment to look at how it impacts on the neighborhoods. And the other thing, and with that line, there's one more item to it, you just pointed out to me, which is that this parcel there in front of this hotel, which is you want to buy, do you guys have that? Is there money in there for that? To do the environmental assessment that would be necessary to add that property to the airport?
So your first question, we did include design money and environmental money that would be done as part of the design process. The projects that are kind of just fixing existing pavement, like Victor and Lakeshore Taxiway, we would have to go to the FAA and basically get, well, let me just say, the amount of environmental review required for sort of fixing existing pavement is very, very limited. But when you talk about the development east of Wood Strip, the ones that Kathy was talking about, and I think the ones you're talking about, when you're talking about a new trail on wetlands, those kinds of things that involve expansion would have a higher level of environmental review. And yes, the monies for that are included. The property acquisition on the east side of Lakewood, I can't remember exactly, but I thought property acquisition has a higher level of environmental review too. Terry, do you remember with the property that you acquired by the north end of Wood Strip, was there an environmental assessment required for that?
I don't believe there was, no.
Okay.
I'm not positive of that.
Okay, so I'm not exactly sure what the level of environmental review is needed for the property acquisition. Certainly, if it was property acquired for a big development, we tend to have more of an environmental review and property acquisition that this is proposing for, which is more to protect the land and access to the airport.
Do we have any other questions or comments from the public?
Could you please tell me, I can't tell from this map, but the J Trail, is that going all the way up to Northern Lights, or is it just short of reaching Northern Lights?
Our graphic does not show it going up to Northern Lights. In fact, somebody yesterday mentioned that as well, that it should. I think some of the city's trail like plans may show a trail going up to Northern Lights as well. Either up there or maybe through this route or something. So I think there is some thinking along the community that there's been a need for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Charles, do we have anybody on the live screen that has asked anything? Or?
No questions have come in via the internet.
Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Well, thanks, everybody. We didn't have comment sheets for any of you. Well, most of you picked them up, but if you want to put anything in the mail to us or email something, the information is on the comment sheet. We will put out meeting notes that captures your questions and tries to capture my responses if they're questions and captures your comments. And those will be on the website sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Again, by this fall, hopefully September, we'll send out a notice that the draft report's available, and then it'll be available for review and comment for 60 days. So I won't be hearing from me for a while, but this fall. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, Tom.
Please feel free to grab a cookie on your way out.